Hey everybody, it's Vanessa, the Crafty Gemini, and welcome to a late night sewing chat here with me tonight. We're going to be talking about quilting, and that is the stitching that we're doing through fabric layers when we are making bags or pouches. Okay, so before I start my little talk tonight, let's go ahead and pop into the chat and make sure that y'all can see me and hear me. So if you can, let me know where you're tuning in from. I see we have Elisa tuning in from Sao Paulo. Wow, all the way from Brazil. Awesome. Who else we got in the house? Barb is tuning in from California. I see we have several of our California friends since it is at least a decent hour on the West Coast. It's 10 o'clock at night here on the East Coast, but for y'all, I think it's 7 o'clock right now. So awesome. Welcome. Hi, Wendy. How are you tuning in, Wendy? Isn't it tomorrow for you? Well, I guess it's the middle of the day. Maybe, what, 1 p.m. for you, Wendy, in Australia? Maybe. I think my time might be close, at least, if not right. Hi, Miss Geraldine, tuning in from New Orleans. We got Evelyn in the house from California. We got Kathy from Washington State, so we got a lot of West Coast people in the house. Hi, Janelle. Thanks for tuning in. Okay, we got Wendy from Southern California and Laura tuning in. She says late night is awesome. She's tuning in from Maryland. Hey, girl. All right, Grace is in the house from Long Island, New York. Heather, yay! She says it's a great time for us on the West Coast. She's tuning in from California as well. Hi, Bob from Iowa, tuning in. Great. Yeah, Wendy says it is. It's the next day for her, you see. I know my Australian peeps, the ones that tune in. All right, awesome. Yeah, we got some other people tuning in from the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, more Cali people. Okay, awesome. Well, welcome. This is such a weird time, and I'm so surprised that there's so many of you on, but great. All right, so we're going to start talking about quilting. And I think first, and most importantly, I want to define what quilting is. And the reason I'm doing this is because I got a comment from somebody maybe a week or two ago on a little video reel that I did talking about quilting. And it was sharing a tip for this project where I say, you know, have you ever quilted something with two different colors, threads? So we put one color on top that matches whatever the fabric that is on top. And then I used a lighter color thread for this kiwi fabric that's in there underneath the clear vinyl that I used a gray thread in the bobbin. So it was basically a little video saying, hey, if you've never tried using one color thread on top and one in the bobbin, give it a try. That way the thread matches, especially if you do like a lot of us do for bags and pouch type projects where we usually tend to lean towards using a darker colored fabric on the exterior and then a lighter colored fabric on or in the lining area. And some lady wrote in there and she's like, that's not quilting. And I just had to laugh because I'm like, it actually is. So let's go ahead and give everybody the over the shoulder camera shot here so I can explain to y'all what we mean when we say quilting, because the word quilting is used to describe several different things. So one, the art of quilting, right? If you make quilts, you're a quilter and you're into quilting, okay? The whole art of making quilts is called quilting. But when we are making a quilt, the specific step in the quilt making process that we call quilting is what you see here, is the stitching that goes through whatever the fabric is on top, okay? Through your batting, and if it's an actual quilt, you'll have a backing fabric on the other side as well, that the stitching goes through everything to basically hold what we call your quilt sandwich. Okay, you have fabric, the puffiness of the batting in the middle, and then you have another layer of fabric. And so the stitching that you do through all those layers to hold them together is called quilting. Does that make sense? So I know if we have beginners or people who are not quilters and you like to make pouches, I think it's important to differentiate between how we are using the term and the word quilting tonight here. When I talk about quilting your bags, I'm talking about the stitching that you're doing through the fabric and whatever the stabilizer or interfacing is. Okay, so that's what we're talking about here tonight. And so if you were to see a bag like this in the store, right? If you know some of those popular brands of bags that have this type of crosshatch stitching, where you have the lines going like this on the diagonal, they call it a quilted bag, a quilted purse, a quilted backpack, a quilted whatever. That's what they mean by that. That doesn't mean that this came from a quilt that they chopped up and then made it into the project necessarily, right? They could have, but the stitching that you see through here and the assumption that there's some type of a batting or wadding, for those of you in the UK or Australia, I think they also call it wadding. It's just the puffy material that we put in between the fabric layers and the stitching that goes on top of it. That's what we're talking about in quilting, okay? Oh, Garnet says she lost the audio. Hopefully everybody else can hear me. check if you're watching on your phone, Garnet. Sometimes this happens. If you have your phone set to silent, the audio will not kick on. So maybe if you're on your phone, that is. All right. So Mary L says, yes, I quilt and I make bags. I also make quilt bags. You are making sense for sure. Okay, great. So I wanted to explain that, especially for people that are not quilters. I feel like in quilting, we know what we're talking about, right? Because we use it all the time. Okay. Okay. Oh, great. Joe says, how funny. I'm actually doing that on a table runner right now. Awesome. So that's what we're talking about for bags. So now I wanted to go into why you would want to quilt your quilt panels. Okay. So for example, we'll share this one again. This is my Sky Mini barrel bag. And for those of you that don't know, maybe don't follow me on social media, or maybe you've gone away for a while and you're just getting back to your quilting and sewing now, definitely check out either on my Facebook page or my Instagram. I've posted several video reels on how I quilted this fabric on my long arm quilting machine. However, this is kind of like the one extreme of making quilted bags, right? And I'm going to share with you and demo for you how you could do it on your regular sewing machine, even if you're not a quilter, even if you don't know how to do free motion quilting like I did here, okay? But you can see what this does to this fabric, right? It creates this cool texture. These were all swirls that I freehand quilted on my long arm. That means the direction of the swirls and where the stitches are and the size, it was just me moving the machine, doing whatever I felt like doing. This is great if you do play on your sewing machine and dabble in free motion quilting. If you have a long arm, absolutely you should be playing around with quilting fabrics because it is so much fun. It's like doodling on fabric, right? I think it's a little bit more difficult because it takes a little bit more training if you're doing it on your sewing machine, because on a long arm machine, I like to reference it and like kind of explain it to people that you're moving the pen, right? Because you are moving manually the machine that is stitching to make the design. So it really is like doodling. And I was a doodler as a kid. So, you know, doodling on the sides of your notebooks and stuff like that. If you did that a lot when you were a kid, you probably would really like free motion quilting on a long arm machine, okay? On a sit down sewing machine, it's the opposite. Instead of us moving the pen to doodle, okay, you're now moving the paper and the pen is stationary, right? The machine needle is stationary, is just going up and down. And to make whatever design you want, you are moving the paper. So it's a little bit of a backwards movement that you have to make versus what we are used to because we probably learned to write at an early age, okay? So this is the extreme if you're doing it on a long arm, but you could do this exact same thing on a sit down machine. But yes, it would, you know, take practice and be a little bit more advanced. Now, the way opposite range of quilting your fabric would be something like this. Okay, I just have lines that are straight that I drew out on the fabric and I just stitched on them. That's it. You put it down right in the center of your presser foot and you stitch down the lines that you drew. So this, y'all probably have seen stuff like this, say like on like Vera Bradley type bags. You know, when you see a quilted bag in the store, you might already have one of your own. You see this type of thing. This is a 1 inch by 1 inch square grid that I did this. This is called cross hatching because I kind of go on a diagonal 1 inch apart as I draw the lines, and then you go in the opposite direction. So you draw lines perpendicular to the ones you did the first go around and you stitch just down the center, okay? This is super easy to do. You don't need to be a quilter. You don't need to know how to free motion quilt. All you need to do is know how to follow the line that's on the fabric, feed it right through your machine straight, okay? So anybody can do this. If you know how to thread your machine and you know how to put in the thread and a bobbin, you can do this. So this is a great, super beginner-friendly option for y'all to start off with if you're gonna be quilting your bags. Now, I have another bag here, and this is actually my first bag that I'm gonna be teaching. The video course for this goes live next Friday on November 8th, I believe, in my new mini bag club number 4. Okay, so I recently opened up my next bag club. It's the mini edition 4. I have over a dozen bag clubs at this point. I've been doing this for a long time, but this is the 4th edition of the mini bag club. So all these bags are typically smaller, going to be smaller in size. And so I think you can kind of see on this one, this is another option of quilting. Okay, I used a white thread and I just did these wiggly lines back and forth. They're not equally spaced apart. There's no rhyme or reason to them. I literally just put the fabric and just kind of wobbled the fabric a little bit through as it was stitching across. But it does help give some movement to an otherwise rectangular shaped pouch. And I did that on both sides, okay? Even though I used a light fusible batting as the interfacing that's on the other side of the exterior fabric. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that. Now, before I forget to mention it, if you want to learn how to make bags in community with my step-by-step video lessons that never expire, definitely check out the link that's in the caption on Facebook and in the video description box on YouTube so that you can get in on basically the early bird sale price, because registration closes on November 10th, 2024, okay? So if you want to learn how to make some of the bags, and I can go through them later, you can check those out. The link is in the description box below, and you'll see them on the page as well. Those of you that are tuning in tonight, if you've already signed up for Mini Bag Club 4, let us know in the chat box so people can see that they won't be alone. There's lots of other students that have signed up. Okay. Yes, see, Winless Original says, I like quilting, but I don't always want to make a quilt, so projects like this are great. I totally agree. Sometimes the quilts that we make take us weeks, not me, because y'all know, if I can't make it in a day or two, I'm not doing it, usually, unless it's, you know, for something special or specific. But sometimes people work on quilts for months and years, right? If you just want kind of an instant gratification little project, or one that you can crank out 4, 5, or 6 for gifts real quick, this is a great way to kind of scratch that quilting itch without having to tackle the whole quilt, okay? Oh, awesome. Janelle says, I'm in. Barb says she's in. Heather says, I love the bags in this new club. I'm signed up, of course. Awesome. Thank you so much, Heather. I love that. That's so nice. Thank y'all so much. Okay. Oh my gosh. Peggy says she signed up. Gloria signed up. Pamela signed up. Jan signed up. Rachel's all signed up. Thank y'all so much. I cannot wait to see what fabrics you're choosing. And I hope y'all are going through your stash already, picking out some really, really cute fabrics. Okay. So this is the Bella Buddy bag. This is the first one, and I always start my clubs by teaching the easiest one in the group of 5. So this one has a little strap that clips on. So the idea for this one was that we can clip it on as a separate little bag to loop over either a large tote or a backpack, just to sort it, stuff into here, like a little zipper pouch with a handle, okay? That you can obviously unclip, loop it over something, and then loop it closed again. But then after I made it, I was like, this makes the cutest little purse. And I think it's a little bit more handy and easier to tote around than a wristlet. You know, like the wristlets that have the big loop on them. So this is even cuter, I think. I mean, I can make this in some evening fabrics. Imagine if I made this out of a similar soft vinyl, some shimmery stuff. I can use a silver metallic zipper. I think that could easily work for like a nighttime evening wear clutch, but not a clutch, right? With a little handle instead. Or for a little girl that wants a purse, I think this would be so cute for them to tote around without it having to be like a huge long strap. Okay, so that's the first one, and so that's why I wanted to do this live session to talk about this quilting. Here I have another sample, and you can see that they're the same, but do you notice that on this one I don't have any stitching? Okay, that's because I used the exact same light fusible batting to make both of them. So here's important to note. So those of you that are kind of new to this stuff, you can start thinking, why and when would I quilt the exterior bag panels, okay? If you're using a fusible product, and I have some here. This is a chunk of light fusible batting. You could also use a thicker, puffier fusible fleece. You know, it kind of depends on the manufacturer. Here, I'll grab a chunk of... Here, this is the loftier stuff, something like this. That's like a little bit puffier and thicker. All the manufacturers are basically going to have their different levels of loftiness. Some will be one-sided fusible. Other products will be a little bit stiffer when you fuse them because they have adhesive on both sides, making them a double-sided fusible. But you could use any of this stuff. Okay, if you have some in your stash from years and years gone by and you never used it because you said you were going to make bags and you never did, pull that stuff out for this mini bag club, because most of these bags use anything. Regular quilt batting, leftover quilt batting scraps, light fusible batting, fusible fleece, or, and then there's only the one bag. The mini barrel bag is the one that uses the foam stabilizer, okay? All the other ones use regular stuff, and it doesn't have to be fusible. So you can definitely tackle these bags by using up what you have, okay? So I was saying about when you would quilt. If you're using a fusible product, do you have to quilt? No, okay? Because when we're talking about the quilting, remember I said the quilting in this case is the stitching through the layers. You have to remember that this step is just for decorative purposes. Okay, the only time really that I use it sometimes for like the functionality of it is if I want to densely quilt it, meaning I'm adding so much more stitching to it because I want that exterior panel to be stiffer. Okay, but in other like aside from that, I'm only quilting, whether it's straight lines, whether it's wavy lines, or whether it's free motion stuff like this, is just decorative. Okay, so remember that. It's not going to change the integrity of the project if you decide not to quilt. Do you see this? They're the same. This one has quilting on both exterior panels. This one doesn't. It doesn't matter. Okay, so it's up to you. Which, those of you that are making stuff to sell at craft fairs, craft bazaars, or you have last minute gifts, guess what? It's a great way to go with the fusible stuff because you don't have to quilt it. And you know that the fabric layers are not really going to separate if it's a good product, okay? You fuse it, you keep it moving, you go on to the steps. But depending on the fabric, depending on the vibe, what type of fabric you use for the exterior, what colors you're using, you sometimes may want to tie things in with the different colored threads to match the fabric or to match the zipper, whatever it is, then you may want to go in and add some lines of quilting, okay? But that's completely optional if you're using a fusible product, because when you fuse it, you hit it with the iron and it melts it to it, it's not going anywhere, okay? Now, if you're not using a fusible product, and let's show a couple different thingies here. I have that foam stabilizer, okay, that I use for the barrel bag. I have regular cotton quilt batting, and it doesn't have to be cotton, okay? It can be wool, it can be bamboo, it can be polyester, it can be cotton polyester blend. Any quilt batting that's on sale you could use for all these bags, okay? This is polytherm. It's like a thermal fleece, basically. If you were making any of these as a lunch bag or some type of insulated tote that you wanted to make and you want to quilt it, you can stitch and quilt through this as well, okay? But it's just decorative to hold the exterior fabric to that stabilizer if it's not a fusible product. Does that make sense? Because look, here I have the two samples. This is fabric that has been fused to the light fusible batting. So it's already one together because I ironed it all flat, okay? Here I have fabric and it's not been fused because this is regular cotton quilt batting. It doesn't have adhesive to fuse to it. So in something like this, you are either going to be, and you can read on the pattern instructions that you're trying out, or of course I tell you in my video courses if I need you to do some type of quilting so that the two layers are held together, okay? If the pattern or the instructor specifically don't tell you that you have to go ahead and quilt through the layers, then one thing that you can do to help keep the layers together is just to do a line of basting stitch, which is just a long straight stitch about 1/8 of an inch in from the outer edges, and just go straight like that. And that will just help you help keep both of the things together, right? Whatever the interfacing is, in this case batting, and the fabric together, so that later on while you're sewing up side seams and stitching things together, it doesn't mistakenly move on you, okay? Because that is the worst thing. When you finish a pouch or a little bag or whatever, and you turn it right side out and you look on the side and you're just like, oh my gosh, I missed a whole chunk. Okay, you can either have a hole there if your seam allowance wasn't very consistent, or if the fabric folded back, you can be looking at the wrong side of the fabric caught in the seam. Okay, so for something like that, you definitely want to hold the two fabrics together. Another option would be, I don't have it here, but like a temporary spray adhesive that you could spray behind the fabric and smooth it onto your batting. That usually helps keep it in place long enough for you to, construct the whole pouch. All right. Let's see. Sorry, I'm trying to see if I'm not missing any specific questions here. Yeah, Laura says, quilting adds so much to a bag. And my gift recipients think I did something so much more complicated. Exactly, right? So if we're revisiting this one that I did earlier before the live, I want to show y'all. Maybe I can get it a little bit close up here, because this is going to be the next thing. Since now you know that the quilting, if you're using a fusible interfacing, is optional, right? And I said that the quilting is decorative. So what I used here, and you see probably why you see so many different little colors in the thread, I used a variegated thread, okay? It's on my machine now, and I'll get to it in a second because I want to use the other panel here to show you exactly how you're going to draw those lines and stitch them out. But see, if I wanted this to just be plain and everything to blend in, I could have easily used a navy blue thread, right? If you wanted the lines to kind of pop up a little bit, but let it be darker than the fabric, you could have easily used black, okay? See, if I would have used like this navy, oh, it would have just blended in nicely. I mean, you'll see the lines of stitching, but I don't think they would pop as much as this because this has a bunch of different colors going through it, okay? If I did white on a darker chambray, this is like a denim wash cotton chambray, okay? If I did white on here, it's gonna pop. It's really going to stand out because if you go light on a dark fabric, you get a lot of visual contrast, okay? If you go dark with the stitching on a light fabric, you're going to get that same amount of visual contrast because it's going to pop against it, okay? The darker the thread, the more it's likely going to blend in. So one quick tip for choosing thread colors is if you want the stitching to blend in more with the fabric, go with a color of thread that is slightly darker than your fabric and it'll blend in better. Sometimes people think, oh, I'll go a little bit lighter. The lighter you go, the more it's going to stand out because it plays even lighter when it's next to a dark fabric. So remember that. If you have a lot of different threads, you can even audition them, okay? Some of the stuff or some of the tips that I like to share with my students for auditioning thread is literally pull some off the spool because when you look at it like this, it looks darker than it really is because it's so concentrated, right? The spool is just wound of all the thread. So when I say audition the thread, that means pull some off and lay it in one strand like this on your fabric so you get a better idea of what the color of the stitches will look like, okay? Because it's going to be one strand in the stitch, right? Not a super chunky concentrated bit like this, and you can see that that would blend in really nice so you can barely see it, okay? Whereas if we went with a white thread, and this is not to say that white would be wrong. It just depends on the look that you're going for, right? Because you're customizing this. Look at this. I mean, white, we know what white looks like. But white on this navy, those stitches would pop, okay? So when would we want to avoid something like this? Well, if you're a beginner and you're not too confident in sewing straight lines, if you go wonky a little bit on some of your lines, if you're doing straight line stitching like this, if you go a little bit wonky, it's really going to show up on when you have this type of high contrast, okay? So keep that in mind. If you want things to blend in, go slightly darker than your fabric with the thread, okay? Yes, Zena says with the light thread, your mistakes will stand out. You know it all too well already, Zena. Maya says, what stitch length do you recommend? So this is great. I always personally, and how I teach my students, I like to go slightly longer with the stitch length for any type of top stitching. And again, remember, top stitching is decorative. And so when we're talking about the quilting here, this is decorative as well. It's stitching that's going on top that's going to be displayed on the finished outer fabric, all right? So I like to go 3 millimeters to 3.5, okay? If I'm doing some type of quilting through really thick layers, then I will bump it up sometimes to even a 3.5 millimeter in stitch length, and that tends to work really good. Okay, you can adjust that a little bit up or down depending on your sewing machine. If it doesn't like to sew through thick stuff, you can always help it a little bit by lengthening your stitch length a little more too, okay? Tamara says, I love quilting bags with variegated thread. Absolutely. And so for those of you that don't know what variegated threads are, they are threads that they change color in the strand. So let me pop this one up. This is a sulky thread, and this is just a 30 weight cotton. So this is a little bit thicker than your usual sewing cotton, but you can kind of see there. And sometimes it'll tell you like what the distance is between the color changes. Otherwise, we don't know. And we just see lots of pretty colors. So we stitch it out and then we see how it looks. Okay. So this, and let me give you, put this in focus for y'all just to give you an idea like that. So this has like greens, blues, and purple, yellow, green, a little purple, red, green, yellow, purple, like that. Okay, so if you see one like this in your stash that you have never got around to using, a great place to use it is in quilting your outer bag panels too. Okay, and this helps add kind of another little level of something going on there, even when you're doing something as basic as straight line quilting. Okay, so that works really, really well. All right, Lynette says, the first thing I learned about sewing, audition the thread by pulling a piece out. Absolutely. Very, very important. Now, because we're talking about quilting and we've already established that it's decorative, right? You don't have to use the same type or even quality of thread that you would use for construction seams, okay? So because it's decorative, if you are a machine embroiderer, if you are a long arm quilter and you have fancy threads, this is a great place to use it too because it's decorative. You don't have to worry about it affecting the integrity of the seams for the construction steps. You're using it for a pop of whatever you want, right? So I have some, this is a rayon thread. And you know, when you're using the rayon threads or like machine embroidery thread, oh, it's so shiny and cute. This is like a more pinky taupe. But see, and you see the sheen to it for sure. You would get that same effect in your stitching. So depending on the fabric that you're using and the style of the bag, right? If you were making something in evening wear or you had to make like a bridesmaid clutches or something, this would be amazing to add a little kind of level of quilting with a little bit of sheen, maybe matching the thread to the bridesmaids' dresses. There's so much that we can do because we have sewing machines, y'all. So don't think that you have to use just like a matte colored cotton thread. You can use rayon thread. You can use shiny polyester threads that are used in machine embroidery. This is another one. There are glow-in-the-dark threads out there. There's transparent, like clear threads. There's so many different options when it comes to thread that you can use out there. So don't feel like you're limited to just whatever the neutral colors are that you tend to have for constructing seams. So I just had pulled out a couple polyester, rayon, whatever you want to use, all your machine embroidery threads. Free motion quilting like Glide, if you use 100% polyester with that sheen to it, would look amazing for your quilting as well, okay? Which actually, now that I'm talking about that, you can't see it here because the soft vinyl fabric itself is shiny, but I did use, and it's still on my long arm, actually, I'm gonna pluck it off because I'm done with that project. So let me grab this thread from here just to show y'all. The thread that I used to quilt this, okay, is 100% polyester shiny machine embroidery thread. I got this out of my machine embroidery thread stash, which is different from my sewing stash, but I needed something solid black and I didn't want it to be super matte, like just like a plain cotton, okay? So I did use embroidery thread and I didn't have it in Glide in black, which is what I typically use for my free motion quilting, but this worked out great, okay? Easy peasy. And so I feel like I got a little bit different of a look to this. Like it goes with the sheen of the soft vinyl fabric, okay? So, oh, awesome. Hi, Diana. Susie Brown says she signed up for the club. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Okay, so we were talking about this, and so I mentioned that the quilting is decorative. You can play around with tons of decorative stitches as well. If you don't want to do free motion, you don't want to do this, you can play around. Of course, you want to test it first, but if you have a fancy computerized machine, like a regular sewing machine, but that's computerized, and it has a lot of different decorative stitches, you can stitch those out and use that as your quilting, okay? Especially if you're using something like a light fusible batting, which is pretty thin, or regular quilt batting. That's really good. Sometimes when you're using the thicker stuff, like if you're quilting the fabric to foam, sometimes on the decorative stitches, because the sewing machine has to go backwards and forwards, you know, depending on what design you chose, the bulky stuff can sometimes, the stitches, like the decorative stitches don't turn out the way that they're supposed to because it's trying to stitch through too thick of material, okay? So that's why I say always test it out, okay? But through the thinner stuff, it shouldn't have any issue, especially if it's something like this that's fused. It basically makes it so that this is all one layer of fabric anyways, and then you can go ahead and crank out your decorative stitches and see what you get and see if you like that for your outer panels, okay? All right. Oh, thank you. She says those Chicago screws look great on the barrel bag. Yes. So we talked about this Bella Buddy bag. So this is going to be bag number 1 for those of you that are tuning in and are interested in signing up for my mini bag club number 4. It's basically a bundle of 5 courses where I provide you with step-by-step video lessons on every single one of the 5 bags. And you know how it goes for my classes and clubs. Once you sign up and you pay the registration fee, you have unlimited access, okay? We do have a calendar though that you'll want to download because the content is dripped out. So the calendar itself is from November November through December, and you'll see here the dates and times when each of the different 5 bag courses will be posted, as well as when we have the live question and answer sessions. If you cannot make the live events, just like tonight, if you couldn't make this live event, they're all recorded and the replays are posted in the club account for students to access at a later date. So you can always go back and watch the replay. Okay, that's totally fine. All right, Laura's asking, does shiny thread work well on your Juki machines? Absolutely. And if by shiny you mean like a 40 weight polyester like Glide and stuff like that that I use, absolutely. Mine has no problem. You know, if you have a fussy machine, you might want to test it out a little bit first on a sample and see if maybe the bottom thread is getting pulled or the top thread is getting pulled, and you can do minor adjustments. But I find that if it's in the 40 to 50 or even 60 weight range, which is usually the range of the cotton and polyester threads I'm working with anyways, I don't ever really have to touch the tension, okay? Unless I go down to like an 80 weight or 100 weight thread, then sometimes I do then, okay? All right. Okay, Mrs. Parker is asking for the link. I'm a newbie. Welcome. We love newbies. That's who I mostly teach for. Some of my students that are so experienced, they fast forward through my videos. They play my video lessons on 2x speed because I tend to go slow. I repeat things a lot, mostly for beginners, because I want everybody to be able to make these types of bags and maybe even surprise yourself, okay? So this was the first one. Let's see. If I was quilting exterior panels for something like this, okay, and for any size bag, I just chose something like this because it's going to be easier for me to show. Remember that if it's fusible, you could leave it as is and not quilt it, okay? If you're short for time or you just don't want to fuss with it, use a fusible product like fusible fleece or fusible batting. But if you do want to add the quilting, here's how it would go. Cross hatching, like I said, straight lines is easy peasy, okay? But when I say straight lines, and let me grab my Choco liner. Where'd you go? I'm probably staring right at it. Here it is. So, couple different things you might want to add to your stash if you're new to sewing this kind of stuff. Something to mark your fabric with, okay? So I always keep 2 different things on hand at least. One is usually purple or blue, and this is what I will use to mark light fabrics. And then I love, love, love my Choco liner. We carry these in the online shop at craftygemini.com/shop. This is a little wheel that when you roll it back and forth dispenses chalk in white. So this is my favorite to use for darker fabrics because it really shows up good. So if you're doing straight lines, you got to decide. Are you going to do just straight lines up and down, close together? Are you going to do straight lines horizontally maybe across this way? You got to play around with it and just decide what is the look that you're going for the quilting. Sometimes we do, say, vertical or horizontal lines, and then we'll change up the spacing. Like 2 lines will be 1/4 of an inch apart, then from the second to the third line, a 3/4 of an inch, then the next one over 1/2 an inch. And you could play around and give it your own texture, your own design, because that's really what this is doing. It's decorative, right? If you're using a fancy thread or a variegated thread on a solid color fabric, you're adding another element of decoration to it with the thread color. Okay, but if it's blending in and it's the same thread color, then what you really are doing more than anything is creating a cool look and texture, okay? So that's what we're gonna go for here. Now I will say, if you use a fusible product and you do your quilting, you're not gonna get as much texture as if it wasn't a fusible product, okay? Because when I iron this fabric to the fusible adhesive, it melts that adhesive behind the fabric and it makes it all one layer. So there's not really a huge difference between stitching the 2 layers together in one spot and then allowing the fabric to really pop and puff up in this area. Does that make sense? So think about it this way. The thinner the fabric and the puffier the stabilizer or interfacing you're quilting it to, the more texture you will get. So in this case, we have a ton of texture going on, and that's because I use the foam stabilizer. Okay, so the same, and I didn't even get as much effect as I would get with cotton fabric because a soft vinyl is a little thicker than plain cotton fabric, okay? But where you can compress something that's puffy with the stitching, with the quilting that you're doing through the layers, in the areas it doesn't have that stitching, they're really gonna puff up and pop, and that's how you get that really, really cool texture, okay? In this bag, no, Nancy, there are no pockets inside this bag because it's so little, look. I mean, you could add maybe like a long patch pocket here, but it's already kind of slanted. So for me, I just left it as just one, you know, open space in there. Okay. All right. So let me see. Antonia's asking, can you use this quilting technique to make a cell phone holder that also contains slots for credit cards? Absolutely. Absolutely. I have different organizers and a bunch of different wallets and stuff, and a lot of them we quilt the exterior. As long as, say, something like the credit card slots, that's typically going to get installed in a lining panel that's separate from the exterior. So whenever you're making a project that has a separate lining from the exterior, you can absolutely quilt the outside. Okay? Because it's not like you're going to be stitching through the credit card slots, right? Like if it's all one layer and then you have to go in and quilt, you can't do that because you're going to stitch together everything that's on the inside. But if they're separate panels, absolutely, that's a great time to do it. Okay, so I'm going to do what I did here, and I will mention that the more lines of stitching you do, the longer it's going to take. So consider that. If you're in a rush, don't go with 1 inch squares. I'm just saying. So usually on bigger projects, I will go with like 2 inch or 1.5 inch just to like hurry up and quilt like larger chunks. But on these little projects, even a little thing like this is not going to be too much. So here's how I'm going to start. I am placing the bottom corner of this right in one of these square boxes. You see that? Where it's flush with this line and flush here, right? Because each square on my cutting mat is 1 inch square. So I'm just going to start off by running my ruler from where this line meets this line, from here to here, like a little diagonal. Like that. Okay? And then I'm going to run my choco liner right there. Ta-da! Okay? Once you got that first line done, now you just continue whatever the increment of the spacing is, which I just mentioned for this guy was 1 inch. So that means I'm going to put the 1 inch line of my ruler on the 1 inch line, or on the little line that I just did, and that puts now this side edge of my ruler 1 inch over. We do the same thing, do it again, and do it again, and do it again until you repeat all this. Now, I typically, if I'm going to go in both directions, I prefer, especially if I'm using the choco liner, because this chalk is quick and easy to make disappear, I will just do the lines in one direction, go to the machine, stitch on it, and you'll see that most of the chalk will be gone, and then I come in and draw the lines in the other direction. Some people prefer to draw all the lines, okay, first, and then they go through and stitch them all, okay? So personal preference, it doesn't really matter which way you do it. See how easy that is? Easy peasy. And then we're just going to place the needle on our sewing machine in the center position and ride these lines that I'm marking out right down the center of that presser foot so that the needle stitches on the lines that we've drawn. And that's it. So you don't even really need to know how to keep a seam allowance. If you still don't sew straight, this is the job for you, because typically I find that students who don't sew straight, it's because they're looking at the needle as they're sewing, and so they're not guiding their fabric through straight. And in this case, you need to look at the line of where the needle's going to stitch. So even if you struggle to sew straight, you can do this, okay? Like that. So that's it. I'm going to go to the sewing machine. Let me bring mine over here. And I have that funky variegated thread that I used right here. I'm going to bump up my stitch length to 3 millimeters. Okay. And this is even easier, even if you don't sew fast. This is easy to do sewing fast because you're just sewing straight. I'm lining up the line in the middle of my presser foot. Now, you see that I'm starting in the long line that goes right here down the middle? This is habit, because when we quilt without a fusible product, and I'm talking quilting like you've made a quilt and you're quilting it on your sewing machine, you don't typically start on one end because then your fabric can shift over, okay? So I like to start in the middle and then work my way to the right or left, okay? And then I come back to the middle area and go the opposite direction so that I can continue to smooth the fabric this way. Now I'm mentioning that's habit. You don't have to do that here if you're using a fusible product because it's fused together. It ain't shifting, okay? So for this type of a little panel that's fused already to the fusible batting, I could just start on one end and keep going. But again, like I said, it's just habit. Because as a quilter, you know, there's certain things that we pretty much always got to do. But for those of you that are newer to bags, and that's another thing, if you've never worked with a fusible, batting or a fusible product, give it a try, because that can help y'all with a lot of the frustrations that beginners have of like the fabric shifting or like the interfacing. You swore you cut it to the right size, you thought it matched, then you made the bag and you know you're missing a chunk on one end. It happens. You'll get better with experience, okay? Oh, awesome. Andrea says, I just signed up for the course as a birthday gift to myself as it is today. Well, happy birthday to you. You about to have 5 more bags that you can gift yourself to. I can't wait to see your finished bags in this mini bag club 4. So for those of you that are wondering, we're covering 5 different mini bags in my next online bag club. It's a mini bag club edition number 4. The link is in the description box below if you're watching on YouTube, and it's in the caption on Facebook as well. We start, or the first course I should say, goes live on Friday, so you still have time. And then remember that my classes don't really expire. So even if you don't have time right now or with the holidays or whatever, you don't have time to access it, this is the lowest price for y'all to get in on it at. And then whenever you do have the time, you just log in and you'll have access to everything, okay? So see, I turned it around, and normally I wouldn't turn it around if I was quilting a quilt, right? Why? Because then the fabric could potentially shift in the opposite direction, but I did it here because it's fused. It's not going nowhere, okay? I'm just trying to get this one done quick so I can share with y'all how it looks, how the chalk is gone, and how you would go back in and draw and stitch out the perpendicular lines that run the other way. Now, when we do these cross hatching things, you saw this one that has just 1-inch squares, okay? I said that I often do like 1.5, 2 inches, and that way the spacing in between the little diamonds that is created are obviously bigger. But you can also switch it up. You could do lines in one direction at 1 inch, like I did here, and then the lines in the opposite direction go bigger. You're gonna get a slightly different angle to that diamond in the center. So, I mean, there's so much you can do even just with plain straight lines. So I highly recommend that you give it a go, even if you're not a quilter. Any little zipper pouches, any bags that you make, try it out. Try it out, because it's a lot of fun, okay? So here's what I normally would do. Because this is my baby machine and it doesn't have an automatic thread cutter. Oof. I wish I could tote one of my big machines up here, but that's okay. I'm used to it now. I go like this and pull out all these beginning threads, and this is for y'all that have just basic home sewing machines like this one. I just pull them all out, and then I just carefully stay a little bit beyond the edge and cut all those little bitty threads off. This is all like my beginning and end thread tails, so that we don't have any of that, because you also don't want to start constructing your project and having those thread tails get caught in the seams. Not very clean looking, and you're going to be pulling on them and they're going to drive you nuts, okay? Let's see. So Chew Tees is asking, what kind of machine do you use for your larger, thicker bags? So this is something that I often like to mention. Believe it or not, this little bag, yes, I quilted the panels on a long arm, but I constructed the whole bag with foam and everything on this same little Juki home sewing machine. So I know a lot of my students just have home sewing machines, okay? So all my classes, including this mini bag club number 4, are taught, and I designed the projects to be made on home sewing machines. So you don't have to have a semi-industrial or fancy industrial machine in order to make these types of bags. I can easily sew this on this Juki, on any of my other like computerized home sewing machines. But if you are going to get into bag making and like making them and selling them, or maybe making leather bags and things like that, using really thick leather straps for your stuff and making more like luxury high-end bags to sell, then you definitely want to invest either in a semi-industrial or industrial machine. My Juki TL 2010Q, which I've had for over 10 years now, I think 11 years, is just a solid heavy-duty straight stitch machine, and that one works great for making these types of projects too, and then for cork, and leather and things like that. Those kind of machines work really, really great. And I do have a video review for that machine on YouTube. If you look up TL 2010Q review Crafty Gemini, just put Crafty Gemini like that and you'll see the video review pop up for you, okay? Pat says, let's see, what kind of machine? Okay, thanks. Yeah, you're welcome. Lynette says, I like the method of sewing the first set of lines first. When I do both lines, something is disappearing on me. That's exactly right. So notice we did the one direction already and there's no chalk left. So if I did this and I had other lines going this way, you can imagine, because it has to do with the vibration, right? It's just chalk. So as we're stitching, it's like tapping it out and you see it start to disappear. So that's one of the reasons I love using the chalk for marking the lines, especially marking light lines on dark fabric. But you don't want to put in all that work to go the other way and then have them be already kind of disappearing on you, okay? Patricia's asking, will you have printouts? So that's a great question. We do. In all of my video courses and the bag clubs, you get the video course step by step, but each project also has its own printable PDF instructions and templates, okay? So not all the bags use a template. 4 of them do, and not for all of the bags. So like for this barrel bag, the only template that you'll need to download is for the side panel here. So let's go over them real quick. This is bag 1. Bag 2 is the hideaway pack. This is a little hip bag with a main zipper here and then another zippered pocket in the back. Okay, so that you can wear it here, and it's super, super sleek looking. You don't even notice it under your clothes. So if you're traveling or something, you want to have your important documents, passport, ID, and all that, you can absolutely rock that. And this is quilted as well. You don't have to quilt it. Notice the back panel is a solid chunk of fabric, obviously with the cutout for the zipper pocket, but this exterior panel here is not quilted, okay? But the front is quilted because it's pieced, and then I went in and did lines 1/4 inch over and just did kind of like a grid of stitching. Let me see if you can even see it with black thread. Yeah, you can see the black thread here. You see how it comes across on both sides of the seam? It's just like echo stitching. And so that in this case is the quilting for that project. So that's the second one. The third one is this little stash and go mini tote. This one. I use pre-quilted fabric, but we're going to quilt our fabric in the course as well, because I know not everybody can find pre-quilted fabric, but the whole outside of this is pre-quilted. Okay, so this is the third one. Number 4 is the Sky Mini Barrel Bag, which is this one that we already saw. It's just one open compartment here. All right, and then the 5th one is the Scout Mini Satchel, and you can see this is not quilted, but it could absolutely be quilted. Or you could just quilt the flap, or you can quilt the flap and the body, or because I use the fusible batting, I didn't quilt either. Right? So again, it's up to you. You can absolutely customize your bags any way that you want to, especially with the stitching to either pop against the fabric or to blend in with the fabric. I mean, we can do so much with it, but you can see because I use the fusible batting, there's no quilting on the exterior. So you can do that too. This one has, I use a hook and loop tape for the closure here. It has one big zippered pocket and then a patch pocket in here for a phone. Okay, and then the rest of the, obviously the inside of the bag. So those are the 5 bags that we're tackling in Mini Bag Club number 4. Remember my step-by-step instructions that never expire. And then you'll be able to submit your questions after the courses go live. You can watch them throughout the week, jot down any questions you might have. You submit them in an online form inside the club. And that way I can prepare for my live question and answer sessions. And we have one Q&A live with me for each one of the 5 bags, okay? And then again, if you can't make it live, they're all recorded. You can watch the replay afterwards, okay? So Joy's asking a great question. Do you cut your fabric and batting larger if you quilt and then cut down? Yes, and I'll explain. I mean, it kind of depends, but typically yes. If I'm using Fusible and I've fused the Fusible stuff to the fabric, I find that it tends to shrink less even if I do a lot of quilting, okay? But I still, because I'm a quilter, I typically will start off with it a little bit bigger, do whatever quilting I want, and then trim it down to the actual size that the pattern is telling you to begin making your project with, okay? The reason for that is that my quilting might be different from yours, okay? If I design something and I quilt these lines 2 inches apart and I say, oh, it barely shrunk, it's still big enough to make the project with, I cannot tell you quilt your panel and it's going to be the same size, because if you decide to quilt these cross hatching lines at 1/2 inch increments, yours is going to shrink a lot more than mine. The more stitching you do on fabric and batting, like this, if I put this fabric on this quilt batting and I just do a big X, it's not really going to shrink much. But if I go in and do a bunch of lines like this, it's going to shrink a bit. Okay, so you definitely always, especially if you already know what type of quilt design you're going to do, if you know you're going to do some dense, heavy quilting, give it an extra little bit, okay? even if the pattern doesn't call for it, because you know it's going to shrink some down. All right. Let's see. CJ's asking if we want to do only one of the bags now, is there a printout for that bag only, or are they all together? So my clubs are all the bundle together. After the club ends, like we go through everything live, then we release each one of the bag courses for sale individually. So for those of you, if you only like one of the bags of the 5 and you don't want to join the club, then you'll have to wait till after January 1st of 2025 to where those individual courses will be available for sale individually. But the best value is for sure to get it all in the club, because we sell the courses by themselves currently. We may go up next year, but we've been trying to hold off for years, keeping everything the same price as we have. So far we haven't increased the price of the clubs. This has been the same for years now. But each class currently is $37 each. And so for $97, you get all 5, plus the live question and answer sessions with me, 1 per each bag. So it's definitely the better value. Okay. Let's see. Yes, this is called a Choco. It's by Clover. Choco liner. You can go to craftygemini.com/shop and see if we have some in stock in there. I think we still have a couple at least. But we do restock these often because I know they sell out all the time. Okay, let's see. All right. So we were talking about that, and then let me show y'all how it looks when we go back in and draw the lines in the opposite direction. You would do the exact same thing. I had started off going like this, and I'm going to go the other way. And this just gives you kind of a good place to start, but I'll tell you the truth. I often just grab this thing and I just go like this, and I just pick a distance over and I just start. Especially if it's a larger panel, doesn't matter. But I know sometimes, especially if you're new, you're kind of like you want to have the step-by-step of how, like, okay, how do I begin every time? So like this, 1 inch to 1 inch diagonal, and I have my starting line, and then I can just measure my 1 inch over from that. And if you get confused, keeping an eye on that 1 inch line on your ruler, you can always put a little piece of washi tape or something right there, because I know sometimes you go through, you think you did all the lines the same distance apart, and then after you quilt it, you're like, whoa, why is there a big space in between these 2 lines? And then you realize, yep, you didn't trace out the right line, or you measured with a different measurement. It happens, it happens, it happens. We've all done it. Laura says, I've discovered that I may not be drawn to a style now, but later it grows on me or someone asks me to make them one. So I have learned to just buy the bundle when it first opens up. That's awesome. And it's true. It even happens to me. Sometimes I'm like, I need a bag like this, that, and the other. And I'm like, wait a minute. I have one like that I designed 7 years ago. And then I go back and watch my own videos. It happens. I don't keep the measurements of everything I've done in my brain. So I love that they're in video. I have students, some lady wrote me the other day, she says, hey, I think I bought a club in 2016 and I haven't been sewing, but I want to get back to it. And sure enough, I just pulled up her account and was like, yep, here's the link, log in here and you'll see your stuff. And I love that. That's so many years later, my students are still going back, accessing their old video courses because they're bags, right? They're projects, they're organizers. In some cases, they're clothes. It's still evergreen stuff. It's not anything that expires. Okay, so here we go. That's the chalk in the other direction. And I like the chalk because, like I said, the vibration of the machine stitching kind of puffs it up and gets rid of it, but it's still enough that you see it, right? And that's the important part. Now, there's also something else called a Hera marker, which I often use too. But for the camera, I think it makes it really easy for y'all to see the white chalk. But you can see that right there. The line that I just stitched is the lightest one because, like I said, the chalk is getting fluffed up and popped off of the fabric as we're stitching. I'm trying to read the chat, but I don't want to go crooked on my lines. So let me see. I see Tamara wrote in something. She says, I love the live Q&As for each bag. I always learn great tips from Vanessa and the group in the club. Yes, because that's another thing. Sometimes people in our Facebook group, we have an optional Facebook group. You don't have to be on Facebook to join the club, but it does help. because people share their ideas there. Sometimes people will post pictures of, like, say 2 different fabric options, and they'll ask for help from the rest of the students and say, like, hey, which fabric do y'all think I should use for the strap, or which one of these fabrics would you use for the outside pocket, or whatever. And it becomes a really cool community of really encouraging bag makers for everybody, you know, to be a part of, especially when you're in the club. But people will post hacks or something, and then we'll chat about it in the live Q&A. Or somebody will say, like, hey, I saw so-and-so was on. How did you do that thing that you did to the bag? Or how did you change this strap or the other? And so we talk about it a little bit more in the live Q&As. And it's great because then they're recorded. So you can go back and watch the replay. If you remember something down the line, like I think we talked about that in the Q&A, then you go back in and you can watch it, the replay as well. Hi, Misty Diane. She says, first time catching you live, watching from Southeast Texas. Hello and welcome. All right, I'm almost done with this. So this is good also to show you in real time. It just takes a couple minutes, you know. If you're playing with variegated thread, if you are repurposing fabric, like this is a cotton chambray, but if you're using maybe chopped up denim jeans, you can add some pops of color with the variegated thread, and you could really level up even a simple little bag and pouch project, okay? So start getting creative, going through your stash, so that when we start, especially with this first Bella Buddy bag, y'all can be ready to go. Because that's, look at that, easy peasy, right? And then I just kind of fluff off the rest of the chalk, and that's it. Now, quick note on the chalk, because people that are new to it will see the different colors, and they'll be like, oh, I need all the colors. Don't do it. Don't do it. Just the white. The yellow and the blue, for me at least, are a nightmare to get out of fabric. Don't do it. Just the white. Just the white. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so CJ was saying she signed up for the bag club, but this time she wants to make bag number 2. Is there a separate supply list for each bag? So the master supply list that's posted has all the supplies just in general for all the bags, and bag number 2 has a specific date and time of when it will be posted. So that bag will have, on the day that the video course goes live for each project, that's the day that you also can download the PDF for that specific project, if that makes sense, okay? All right. Yes, Sylvia says the creative people in this group are so fun to follow in that Facebook group. It's a lot of fun. It is. And then sometimes you're kind of on the fence of like, I don't know what fabrics to choose. And then somebody will post a picture of their project already done. And you're like, I would have never thought, but I think I have fabrics like that. And then people go right to their stash and pull the fabric out and make it. And they're like, oh, I'm so glad you gave me the idea to use those fabrics or whatever. It's super fun. All right. Yeah, Lynette says, yes, they are a nightmare to remove. Don't do it, y'all. I'm telling you. Don't get the yellow, don't get the blue, just the white chalk. Okay, all right, so we covered what is quilting, the stitching through the layers. We determined that it is decorative in most instances. You can quilt it whenever you want to, whether you're using a standalone batting or a fusible type of interfacing batting or fleece or whatever stabilizer, okay? You can quilt it. You can use whatever thread you want pretty much. It's decorative, okay? It's not going to affect the integrity of the bag itself. This is for decoration purposes. If it's a fusible product that you're fusing your fabric to, you don't have to quilt. This is not quilted, just fused. This is fused and quilted with the little wavy lines, okay? This is fused and quilted with variegated thread. Play around with different threads. You can keep it as basic as straight lines, and you can get as wild as free motion swirls, whatever you want to do, stippling, it doesn't matter. You can play around with all kinds of different types of stitching, because as long as you're stitching through the layers, that is your quilting for that bag or pouch project, okay? We talked a little bit about thread options, and then I mentioned that the lighter the fabric on the thicker of the interfacing, the more texture you're going to get. So if you really want the fabric in between your stitches to puff and pop up, that's when you want to go with like cotton fabric on the foam stabilizer. But you got to be careful, because the same way I'm talking about fusible batting and regular batting and all this stuff that are pretty much interchangeable, the foam and all the other battings are not necessarily interchangeable. You got to see what the designer calls for in that specific project, because, and I'll tell you just in my instance, in this specific bag club, say this bag, for example, the Scout Mini Satchel. Because of the size of the bag and the curved panel that goes here at the bottom, there's a lot going on for such a small footprint of a project. I do not recommend that you try and make this one out of the foam stabilizer. Some of you may try it and it may work good, but I don't recommend it because for beginners, who I'm mostly gearing my teaching style towards, they would really struggle to do that. A small bag made of foam like this is tricky to work with because the foam itself on a front panel and a back panel and potentially a flap is eating up a lot of the interior space, and it just starts to get super bulky where all the seams meet. You don't have a lot of room to work inside here because it's so small. So that's why you'll see us often use the foam stabilizers when the projects are bigger, right? And obviously more intermediate or advanced bag makers can make whatever they want out of the foam. But I tend to keep it to the bigger, more open bags so that I am setting up my more beginner students for success. That's, I mean, I'm a teacher, so that's what I try to do. You could do it, but I don't recommend it so that you don't get super frustrated and then end up wasting foam and fabric, and you know this stuff is not cheap. So I like to keep to a thinner stabilizer on the smaller bags, if that makes sense. Okay, let's see. Peggy's asking, will cork work for the fabric for the barrel bag? Absolutely, yes. So in this one, the exterior is separate from the lining. We have a drop-in lining here, and so you can pretty much make the outside of whatever you want. You could use faux leather, vinyl, cork, anything like that you can just either baste to or quilt through. The foam stabilizer is going to give you a really good structure for this size bag, okay? All right, let's see. Yeah, Sylvia says, I'm going to do my best at keeping up. And if you can't keep up, it's no big deal because remember the videos will be there for you to access whenever you want, okay? Let's see. Oh, great. Tamara says, thanks, Vanessa. Tonight was a fun way to start the weekend. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Thank you to everybody else for tuning in, and thanks for y'all's great questions. If you have any other questions for me, you can leave them in the chat below. I will try to get to them tomorrow when I wake up so that I'll go back into tonight's chat and see about answering those questions. If you have any questions specific to me about this new Mini Bag Club 4, you can leave them there as well, and I will check those out. If you want to sign up, you have basically this next coming week before we close the registration, okay? So we close the registration so we can run through the club live for all the students who are signed up, and then we won't reopen it until 2025, and then we will list the individual courses for sale individually, okay? But of course, the best value is definitely to get it now as a bundle of 5, live in real time with the Q&As and all of that, okay? So I will see the rest of y'all in whatever next video I do or whenever I go live again. Thanks again for tuning in. I hope to see y'all in my bag club, and enjoy your weekend, everybody.